The next morning, everything felt too quiet. Even the wind didn't move the trees. No birds, no insects, no jungle sounds, just silence. Shakara opened her eyes first, her ears twitching. She looked around quickly and nudged Ryan awake. He sat up, eyes still heavy with sleep. "What is it?" He whispered. She didn't speak. She just pointed to the trees, to the shadows then. He heard it too, a low humming. Like machines far away. It was growing louder. Ryan grabbed his gear and lifted the cub into the sling. Shakara stood, limping slightly, but ready, her claws out, her tail swaying behind her. The hunter drones had found them again. They moved fast through the jungle, pushing past thick branches and glowing vines. But the sound followed them, always just behind, clicking, humming, beeping. Then came the flash. A blast of white light hit the trees ahead, sending them crashing down. 3 silver hunter droids appeared, walking through the smoke. This time, they weren't alone. Behind them marched soldiers in black armor with alien markings on their chests, their eyes cold, their weapons drawn. Ryan pulled Shakara behind a rock. "They've brought a whole squad," he said, breathless. Shakara looked at the cub, then back at him, her jaw clenched, her claws shook. She was going to fight. "No," Ryan whispered, "you'll die." But she growled low and placed her hand on his chest. She didn't speak the words, but her message was clear. "If I don't stop them now, they'll never stop hunting us." She stepped out, tall and proud. Even with her wounds, she looked like a queen. The hunters paused, recognizing her. One of the soldiers shouted in a foreign tongue, raising his blaster. Before he could fire, Shakara let out a roar so powerful that the ground seemed to shake. She charged forward, claws glowing with heat. The jungle itself responded. Trees shifted. Birds flew from hiding. Even the vines moved. Ryan watched from the shadows, holding the cub tightly. He didn't want to run. He couldn't. Not when she was fighting alone. Not when she had trusted him. Not when he was their Salin. He set the cub behind a log and whispered, "Stay here, no matter what." Then he grabbed the sharp crystal knife Shakara had given him earlier and ran toward the fight. The first droid raised its blaster at Shakara's back. Ryan jumped onto it from behind and drove the knife deep into its control plate. It sparked and fell. Shakara looked back, eyes wide, then gave him a short nod. They would fight together. They moved like one. Ryan used traps, ropes, rocks, and fire. Shakara used her claws, speed, and fury. One by one, the enemies fell, but not without a cost. Shakara was hit by a plasma blast across her ribs. Ryan took a hit to the shoulder, but kept moving. They were bleeding, out of breath, but they didn't stop, because behind them, in the bushes, the cub was watching, and neither of them would let her be taken. Finally, only one soldier remained. He was larger than the rest, his armor darker, his eyes colder. He raised his weapon. Ryan stood between him and the cub, arms wide, bleeding, but strong. The soldier laughed in his alien language and stepped forward. But then Shakara roared again. She leapt, slammed into him with full force, and pinned him to the ground. She didn't kill him with claws. She looked into his eyes and whispered something, a word that made the soldier's eyes widen in fear. Then she let him go. He ran, terrified, disappearing into the jungle alone. The battle was over. Later, they sat near a small fire. The jungle had returned to normal. Birds chirped again. Light filtered through the trees. Peace had returned, at least for now. Shakara leaned against Ryan, tired but alive. The cub curled in Ryan's lap, playing with his fingers. They didn't need words anymore. Their eyes said everything. She had seen him risk his life. He had seen her give up her crown to protect him. Together, they had chosen each other. As the stars came out, Shakara tied a new pendant around Ryan's neck, a crystal shaped like a flame, a symbol of fire and family. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "Salin," she said once more. But this time, she added another word, softly, carefully. "Mate." Ryan didn't move for a moment. Then he looked down at the cub, who smiled up at him with glowing eyes, and he smiled back. Not a warrior, not a scavenger, not just a human, but something more. A father, a protector, and maybe even a partner. They had no home, no planet, no flag, but they had each other. And that was enough to start again, together, in the heart of the stars. Jake woke up with the rising heat of Valera 6 burning through the window. The twin suns had returned, casting long gold-orange shadows across the red sand. His eyes were tired, but alert. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts had been full of the tracks, the cub, and the mysterious figure he saw on the ridge. He poured a small cup of synth coffee and checked the outside cameras. Nothing moved. Still, something felt off. Jake stepped outside, walking slowly toward the edge of his compound. The air was still but heavy, like something was hiding in the silence. He checked the shed where the cub had hidden. It was empty again, but this time, something new was there. A large bone, picked clean, laid gently where the cub had once slept. It wasn't from any animal Jake knew. It was a gift or a message. Jake crouched down, examining it. Then he heard it. A low, deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. He stood up quickly. Turning around, there she was, standing near the far ridge, not far from the outer power lines. She was tall, easily over 8 feet, with powerful legs, wide shoulders, and a sleek body built for the hunt. Her fur was a deep mix of black and gold stripes, glowing faintly under the sunlight. Her glowing yellow eyes locked onto Jake, unblinking. And then she walked forward slowly, deliberately, not charging, not sneaking, just walking. Like she already knew he wouldn't run. Jake stood frozen, his heart pounding. The alien Tigress came within 20 feet of him before she stopped. Her breathing was calm, steady. Her muscles rippled beneath her striped fur, but her claws stayed sheathed. She didn't growl. She didn't roar. She stared then. She tilted her head, looking at Jake the same way a human might study an animal in a cage. It was almost curious. Jake didn't move. He slowly raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. The Tigress lowered her body to the ground, not to pounce, but to rest. Then, to his shock, she let out a deep rumbling sound. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a roar. It was a purr, soft, low, and powerful. It vibrated through the air like the hum of a machine. Jake felt it in his bones. The same sound his old Earth cat used to make when it trusted him. But this wasn't Earth. And this wasn't a house cat. This was something else. Something intelligent, something wild, and something watching him very closely. The cub appeared then, running from behind a large rock and hopping toward Jake. It chirped and rubbed itself against his boot. The Tigress watched without moving. Then she stood up, walked toward her cub, and gently pushed it toward Jake again. She was encouraging it. Jake crouched and patted the cub's head. The Tigress stepped closer. Now within arm's reach, Jake could smell her earth, sweat, wild heat. She didn't attack. Instead, she leaned in, touched his chest with the back of her clawed hand, and then looked him in the eyes. It wasn't just a stare, it was a statement, a claim, as if she was saying, "You fed my child. You are now under my protection, or worse. You are now mine." Jake backed up slowly, his breathing uneven. He didn't want to make her feel threatened, but he couldn't help feeling like something huge had just shifted. Later, inside the base, Jake contacted the nearest outpost. He told them everything: the cub, the tracks, the Tigress, the strange behavior. The voice on the other end went quiet for a long time. Then the officer said something that chilled Jake to the core. "If she purred at you, human, you're already marked." Jake frowned. "Marked for what?" the voice replied. "Tayari Tigress mothers are lethal, territorial, and extremely intelligent. They do not purr for prey. They purr for potential mates." Jake froze, looking back through the glass toward the ridgeline. The Tigress was still there, watching the station from a distance, still calm, unblinking, and the cub curled up right outside his door. Like a loyal pet, Jake leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. He had only shared a meal with a starving cub. He didn't ask for this. He didn't expect it. But now, something primal and powerful had taken notice of him, and she wasn't going away. Jake didn't open the door the next morning. He just stood behind the glass, staring at the cub sleeping on his porch, and beyond it, where the tigress sat like a silent statue on the ridge. She hadn't moved since last night. The wind blew dust around her, but she stayed still, like she was waiting for something, or someone. Jake stepped back and rubbed his face. His thoughts were a mess. He had no plan. No weapons powerful enough to stop a creature like her, but she didn't seem hostile. Not yet. Still, the way she looked at him, so focused, so steady, it was more than instinct. It was personal. Jake turned on the comm panel and connected to the nearest human outpost. A small mining colony 2 zones away. The signal took a minute to reach. Finally, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Outpost 17. This is Command Identify." Jake leaned in. "Engineer Jake Foster. Station V6, I have a situation." He explained what had happened, slowly and carefully. The cub, the food, the prince, the purring, and the giant alien tigress that watched him every night. There was a long pause. Then the officer on the other end said in a low voice, "You're being watched by a Tayari mother." Jake blinked. "You know this species?" "Too well." The man replied, "They're one of the oldest predator races in this sector. They don't speak like us, don't build cities, but they understand territory, survival, and choice. And if she purred for you, you've been chosen." Jake frowned. "Chosen for what?" "To be her mate." The words hit him like a rock. "Wait, what? No," Jake said, laughing nervously. "There's gotta be a mistake. I just fed her kid." The officer's voice was serious. "That's enough. Tayari tigresses are extremely protective of their young. When you fed her cub, you proved you could protect and provide. That makes you more than prey to her. You're now important." Jake stared at the floor, trying to process it. "I don't want to be part of some alien mating ritual." "Doesn't matter," the officer said. "If she's truly picked you, she'll stay close, defend you, and if necessary, kill anyone who tries to take you." Jake's stomach turned. "So what do I do?" "Don't anger her," the man said flatly. "Don't threaten the cub. And whatever you do, don't leave the moon." "Why not?" Jake asked. "Because if she thinks someone's taking you away, she might go on a rampage. They don't handle rejection well." The line went dead. Static filled the room. Jake stood in silence. This was insane. He was just an engineer, not a warrior, not a diplomat. Why him? Why now? He looked out the window again. The cub was gone. But in its place, a large chunk of fresh meat had been left at the door. Another gift. Another offering. Jake didn't touch it. He just stepped outside slowly, feeling the heat of the red desert sun. The ridge was empty. The tigress was no longer there. But her presence was still everywhere. The tracks were all around his station, fresh, large, and deliberate. She had circled his entire compound. She was watching, even if he couldn't see her. That evening, Jake sat with a notebook in hand. He began writing everything. What happened, how he felt, what the officer said. Maybe someone would read it one day if he disappeared. Just before nightfall, the cub returned. It rubbed against his leg, playfully biting his boot. Jake sighed and gave it another bar of food. It purred happily, curling up beside his chair. Then, a soft breeze passed through the air. Jake felt it. Before he heard it, the low, familiar sound. The tigress was back. She stood behind the fence, tall and elegant. But this time she wasn't alone. 3 more alien shapes appeared on the horizon. Taller, older, heavier. Jake's breath caught. Other tigresses, were they here to test him, to warn him, or to take him? He watched them in silence, but none came closer. Only the original tigress stepped forward. She placed a single clawed hand over her heart, then pointed it toward him. Jake didn't understand the meaning, but his instincts did. wasn't just a gesture, it was a vow, and from this moment on, he wasn't just feeding a cub, he had entered something ancient, something wild, and it was far from over. The next morning came quietly, but Jake felt a strange shift in the air. Something was different. The sky was clear. The sun was rising slowly over the dunes, but instead of fear, he felt calm. He opened the door to his station and saw the cub waiting for him again. It bounced on its little feet, tail swishing, eyes wide with joy. Jake bent down and offered it a piece of dried fruit. The cub took it happily and rubbed its furry face against his arm. Jake couldn't help but smile. He glanced toward the horizon, expecting to see the tigress again, but she wasn't there, at least not where he could see her. Jake stepped out, keeping one hand near his sidearm just in case. He walked slowly toward the edge of the base, and there, resting on a flat rock, was the tigress. She looked like she had been there all night. Her body relaxed, her eyes watching him with soft curiosity. Her cub ran up to her, yipping playfully. She lowered her massive head and gently nuzzled the cub. Then her gaze returned to Jake. He raised his hand, unsure of what to say or do. To his surprise, she got up, walked down the slope, and approached him, each step heavy, strong, but not threatening. She stopped just a few feet from him and sat, her tail curling behind her. Jake's breath slowed as he studied her up close. She was beautiful, powerful shoulders, sharp features, glowing eyes, and long striped fur that shimmered under the sunlight. He noticed scars on her arms, old wounds that told a story of survival. This was not just a mother, she was a warrior. He looked into her eyes and spoke softly. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, "but I didn't hurt your cub, I just helped." She tilted her head slightly, then stepped closer. Jake stood still, heart pounding. She slowly raised one hand, paw-like with retractable claws, and touched his chest, not with force, but with gentle pressure. Then she pulled her hand back and placed it over her own heart. Jake remembered the gesture from yesterday. The meaning was becoming clearer. He was being accepted, welcomed, not as prey, not even as a stranger, but as someone chosen. For the next few days, the tigress returned each morning, sometimes with gifts, raw meat, polished stones, or feathers. Other times with just her presence, sitting silently, watching Jake work. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than words. She never crossed the main boundary of his station, never entered his shelter, but she stayed near, close enough that he could feel her warmth in the air. Jake began to feel something strange. Not fear, not confusion, but connection. He started talking to her while working, telling her about his old life, Earth, his favorite food, his boring job, his love for the stars. She never replied, but she listened, and sometimes she purred. He learned to read her body language. When her ears tilted back, she was annoyed. When she blinked slowly, she was calm. When she circled him twice before sitting, it meant she wanted company. The cub had grown attached to Jake. It followed him everywhere, playfully nipping at his tools or tugging his pant leg. At night, it curled beside his door, guarding it like a loyal dog. Jake didn't realize how much he had changed. He had gone from loneliness to belonging, and strangely, it didn't feel wrong. One night, a strong windstorm rolled across the desert. The air turned cold, dust flying everywhere. Jake ran outside to secure the panels and call the cub inside for safety, but the cub was missing. Panic filled his chest as he searched, calling out, his voice swallowed by the storm. Then, through the blowing sand, he saw the tigress. She was standing tall, holding the cub gently in her arms, protecting it with her body. She locked eyes with Jake. Then she slowly walked toward him. She didn't enter the shelter, but she knelt near the entrance, sheltering her child from the storm. Jake stepped outside, ignoring the wind and cold. He knelt beside her and opened his arms. Without a word, she placed the cub in his care, and for the first time, she leaned her body against his. Warmth, strength, trust. Jake felt her heartbeat against his side. He wrapped his jacket around the cub and looked up at the tigress. She was close enough to touch his face, and when she purred softly, he didn't back away, because in that moment, Jake knew he hadn't just fed a cub. He hadn't just helped a lost alien. He had built a bond, one stronger than species, stronger than fear, and that bond was growing deeper with every sunset. The windstorm had passed. The sun returned, shining gently over the red sands of Valorous 6. Inside the outpost, Jake sat by the window, his eyes on the Tigress and her cub sleeping near the rocky ledge. The three of them had survived the cold night together. Something had changed in him. He didn't feel alone anymore, and he didn't feel human anymore, not entirely. But peace never lasted long on alien worlds. That same morning, an unexpected signal came through his comm system. It wasn't from the nearby human outpost. It was a corporate mining vessel orbiting close to Valorous 6. The voice that followed was smooth, polished, and cold. Station V6, this is Command Vessel Atria, responding to life form reports and security pings you sent days ago. Jake frowned. He hadn't sent any pings since the day he spoke with the local officer. Before he could answer, the voice continued, "We've received visual confirmation of Class 5 alien predators near your location. For your safety and company protocol, we will begin elimination within 24 hours. Jake jumped to his feet, slamming the come button. Negative, negative, stand down. He shouted, "The alien is not hostile, I repeat. She is not hostile." But the voice ignored him. "Per standard extraction rights, exotic threats will be removed to secure future mining operations." Jake's hands trembled. He wasn't being heard. They were coming. By nightfall, the low hum of the ship echoed in the sky above. He stepped outside and looked up. Flashing lights passed. Through the clouds, drop pods would land by morning. Armed teams, hunters, traps. They wouldn't ask questions. They would just fire. Jake turned his eyes to the desert ridge. The Tigress was resting beside her cub, unaware of the danger flying overhead. How would he warn her? Would she even believe him? He took a flashlight and walked slowly toward her. The cub perked up first, trotting toward him playfully. But the Tigress stood up, sensing his unease. She let out a low, questioning growl. Jake raised both hands, slowly kneeling to meet her eyes. "They're coming," he whispered. "They think you're a monster. They're going to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, the way his heartbeat quickened, the way his scent changed, the way his hands trembled as he touched her fur. She stepped closer, touching his forehead with hers. Her breath was warm, but there was something different in her eyes now, sharp alertness. The instincts of a huntress. That night, Jake prepared for the worst. He packed supplies, checked old security systems, and found 2 EMP grenades in storage. They were years out of date, but it was all he had. He turned off his station lights to avoid drawing attention. At dawn, the drop pods came, 4 of them, landing like meteors in the sand. Dust exploded into the air as the boots of armored men hit the ground. Jake watched from a distance, hiding behind the solar arrays. The hunters spread out fast, holding rifles that could rip through steel. One of them had a tracker drone, another carried a containment net. They moved with precision. But they had no idea what they were walking into. The Tigress was no ordinary predator. She didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she placed her cub near a small rock cave and turned toward the invaders. Jake tried to signal her, but it was too late. One of the soldiers spotted her and fired a tranquilizer bolt. It missed, but just barely. The Tigress roared, not in pain, but in fury. Her voice echoed through the canyon like a thunderclap. She charged, leaping from rock to rock. With terrifying speed, Jake could hear the panic in the comms. "Target is fast, flanking left. She's circling hold position." "Wait, she's—" Then came silence. One of the soldiers screamed, his rifle torn from his hands. Another went flying, knocked down by a powerful swipe, but they outnumbered her. They were pushing her toward the net trap near the canyon wall. Jake ran forward without thinking. He threw the first EMP grenade at the trap station. It sparked and fizzled, shorting out the net launcher. The soldiers shouted in confusion, spinning around. Jake held his hands up, yelling, "Stop, stop, she's protecting her cub." One of them aimed anyway. Jake dove forward, knocking the rifle away as it fired into the sand. The soldiers surrounded him now. "You're interfering with protocol," the captain growled. "You're siding with a predator," Jake stared. Back, chest heaving. "She's not a predator," he said. "She's a mother." Behind him, the Tigress appeared, blood on her shoulder, but her eyes burning with wild fury. She growled low. But when Jake reached back and touched her fur, she stopped. The soldiers froze unsure, afraid. This wasn't a monster. This was something they didn't understand, and Jake was the only one she allowed to touch her. Asterisk dust swirled around Jake as he stood between the soldiers and the wounded alien Tigress. His hands were raised, his back was to her, and his eyes were locked on the man pointing a rifle straight at his chest. The cub whimpered softly behind them, hiding in the rocks, and the soldiers, confused by the sight of a human defending a predator, didn't know whether to fire or back down. "Stand down," Jake said again, his voice louder this time. "She's not your enemy." The captain narrowed his eyes. "She attacked my men." Jake shook his head. "You fired first." For a moment, no one moved. Then the Tigress let out a deep growl, not a threat, but a warning. She was still injured, her shoulder bleeding where a bolt had scraped her, but her eyes were locked on Jake, and she didn't move. The cub crawled toward them, pressing itself against Jake's leg. He bent down and picked it up with both hands. It clung to him tightly, shaking from fear. One of the soldiers muttered, "This isn't right, she's protecting him." The others looked around, uncertain. Jake used that moment. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm leaving with them. If you try to stop me, I'll disable every vehicle you have." He pulled out the last EMP grenade from his belt and held it high. The captain's face darkened. "You're throwing away your life for a beast," he said. Jake looked over his shoulder at the Tigress, then down at the cub in his arms, and smiled. "No," he whispered. "I'm finally doing something right." He pressed the button on the grenade and tossed it behind him. It burst into a bright flash of blue, frying nearby trackers and shorting out the communications gear. The soldiers shouted, scattering away from the sparks. Jake turned and ran toward the rocks. The Tigress leapt beside him, running fast despite her wound. They disappeared into the Figro cliffs before the soldiers could regroup. For hours they moved through the winding canyons. Jake's arms ached from carrying the cub. The Tigress stayed close, glancing back often to make sure he was keeping up. Once, she stopped and licked the cub's head, then nudged Jake gently. She wasn't just running. She was leading them to safety. They reached a hidden cave deep in the western mountains by nightfall. Jake collapsed just inside, his body shaking from exhaustion. The cub curled against his chest, fast asleep. The Tigress paced the entrance for a while, keeping watch. Then, without a sound, she laid down beside Jake, her large body warm against the cold stone. He looked up at her, his voice soft. "I don't know why I care this much," he said. "But I do," she purred. Low, steady, and soothing, Jake rested his head against her side. And for the first time since he'd arrived on Valaris 6, he felt like he belonged. The next morning, Jake woke to the sound of wind howling through the cliffs. The Tigress was gone from his side. Panic rose in his chest until he heard the soft growl outside. He crawled to the cave's entrance and saw her standing tall, staring out into the desert. She was watching for signs of pursuit. Her posture was alert, but calm when she heard Jake. Behind her, she turned and stepped back inside. She carried something in her mouth, a wild fruit, thick-skinned and glowing faintly. She dropped it near the cub, then looked at Jake. He understood what it meant. She had hunted for them. She had brought food. She had accepted him as part of her family. Jake smiled and tore the fruit in half, sharing it with the cub. The juice was bitter, but refreshing. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve and leaned back against the wall. "I can't go back," he said quietly. They'll be searching for me. I'm now officially a traitor." The tigress didn't understand the words, but she stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. Then, for the first time, she leaned down and pressed her forehead to his. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't accident. It was trust. Jake closed his eyes. He was tired, hunted, and stranded far from human civilization. But somehow, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like fate. The cub chirped happily and jumped into Jake's lap. Licking his hand, Jake laughed softly, ruffling. "It's fur. We'll figure it out," he said. "I don't know what comes next, but we'll face it together." Outside, the sun rose high over the peaks, and deep in that hidden cave, a human, a cub, and a tigress found something rare and powerful, a bond that no soldier, no command, and no rulebook could ever break. They hadn't escaped just a trap. They had escaped the world's expectations and stepped into something wild and new, together. Days passed. The cave became a home, not because it had furniture or comfort, but because there was warmth, life, and something Jake hadn't felt in years. Peace. The cub grew stronger, running around the cave and wrestling with Jake's hands. The tigress watched with calm eyes, only stepping in when the cub got too wild. Jake's wounds healed. So did hers. They shared food, shelter, silence. But in that silence, Jake found something deeper: belonging, not as a human, not as a soldier, not as an engineer, but as something needed. One morning, as the red sun climbed over the cliffs, Jake heard a distant, rhythmic sound, drumming, not from machines, not from humans, but from deep within the canyons. Heavy footsteps followed. The tigress stood up, ears forward, her muscles tight. She looked toward the sound, then back at Jake. She stepped forward, nuzzled her cub gently, and let out a short call. The cub chirped back and hid behind Jake's legs. Then she looked at Jake one last time and ran into the open desert. Jake didn't follow. He waited with the cub, his hand resting on its head. He knew something was coming, something bigger than him. The sound grew louder. Figures emerged from the rocky horizon, tall, powerful, and striped. More tigresses, at least 20, some scarred, some young, all walking in perfect silence, and at their center, she returned. The tigress who had found him, fed him, protected him. She was not just a mother. She was their leader. The others formed a circle around Jake and the cub. No weapons, no claws raised, just eyes, all focused on the human in the center. Jake stood slowly, holding the cub close. He didn't speak, he didn't run, he just waited. The lead tigress stepped forward, her golden eyes meeting his. Then, in front of everyone, she kneeled, her head bowed low, one clawed hand on her chest. Then she reached out and gently touched Jake's chest. The circle around him growled softly, not with anger, but with approval. Jake looked around, confused. The tigress placed her forehead against his. It was more than trust. It was choice. And then, without warning, she roared. The sound shook the cliffs, echoed through the skies. The others roared with her, one by one, a chorus of ancient power. The cub joined in with a tiny squeak. Jake just stood there, heart pounding. He had no translator, no words, but he understood. This was not just a ritual, it was a claim, a declaration. She had chosen him not as a pet, not as a helper, but as her mate. One of the other tigresses stepped forward, taller than the rest. She carried something wrapped in bark, a gift. She placed it in front of Jake and backed away. Jake unwrapped it slowly, revealing a necklace made of bones, stone beads, and a polished human coin. His coin, from his crash pack. They had found it. He looked at the tigress, her eyes softened. She had not only accepted him, she had remembered every part of him. Jake placed the necklace around his neck. He bowed his head slowly, not as a soldier, not as a prisoner, but as someone who accepted the bond. The circle broke. Tigresses stepped forward, nodding once, placing their hands over their hearts, and for the first time in his life, Jake felt like family. Later that evening, the sun dipped low. The tigress lay beside him, her cub curled up beside them both. Jake looked at the sky. He thought of Earth, of the world he left behind, of the people who would never understand. And he smiled because here, on this forgotten moon, he had found something stronger than any home, a wild family, a fierce love, and a future that didn't need translation. She growled softly beside him. He turned and placed his hand on hers. "No more cages," he whispered. "No more running," she purred. And the stars above them shimmered like they were listening.